Would you like to learn new methods for cutting and sewing triangles? Or maybe you're interested in paper piecing and how it can improve accuracy when dealing with these small pattern sections. In this video, you'll learn some new techniques for making triangles while assembling this maple leaf block. You'll also find out how paper piecing sections of a block can simplify seam allowance calculations. Ready to begin? To make this maple leaf block, you'll need small scraps, at least 10 inches by 10 inches of the leaf fabric and of the background fabric. If you're interested in completing this tree quiltini that showcases 3 maple leaf blocks, you can find the supply list below. You'll learn how to complete this tree in the next video of the seasonal sampler series. There are a number of ways to cut and sew this block. I chose this particular pattern because you get to try out 3 different techniques for making triangles. Then you get to choose which one works best for you. For all of these methods, you'll want to first find out the finished size of your block, which in this case is 4.5 inches. To figure out the cutting sizes, you'll have to include 1/4 inch seam allowances. Each one of these sections is 1.5 inches wide. For this 1.5 inch square, it's simple. We start at 1.5 inches. We add 1/2 inch for seam allowances. That's how we get 1/2 inch. So 1/4 inch plus 1.5 inches plus 1/4 inch is 2 inches. So we'll cut 1 square out of the background fabric at 2 inches. For these 2 sections, you'll be using what's called the quick corner method. You'll cut 1 rectangle 2 inches wide by 3.5, and for this piece, you'll need a rectangle 2 inches wide by 5 inches long. Of the background fabric, you'll cut 2 2-inch squares and then mark the diagonal. I got these measurements by adding 1/2 inch for seam allowances to both the length and the width. For example, we'll use this piece, which is C. The width is 1.5 inches and the height is 4.5 inches. So if I add 1/2 inch to the width and 1/2 inch to the height, I have to cut a piece that's 2 inches by 5 inches. To make these quick corners, you want to put right sides together. Make sure the diagonal is going in the same direction as on your pattern. Go to your sewing machine and stitch on the diagonal, press, and then trim the excess. With this quick corner method, you didn't have to cut out triangles and you didn't have to sew on bias edges. These triangles are called half-square triangles, as 2 of them sewn together make a perfect square. You'll cut 1 2.5 inch square of the leaf fabric, 1 2.5 inch square of the background fabric, and on the wrong side, draw a diagonal line through the center. I got that 2.5 inch measurement by adding 1 inch to this finished size, which was 1.5 inches. To make 2 half-square triangles, put right sides together, sew 1/4 inch over from the diagonal on both sides. Cut the 2 sections apart, press to the dark, and then square these up to 2 inches. Place your ruler over the diagonal line. You should have a little extra fabric under this 2-inch line and on the side of this 2-inch line. When everything's lined up, trim this side and then this side. Turn your piece, line up the trimmed edges with the lines on your mat. Line up the diagonal on your ruler with the diagonal on your square. You also want to line up these 2-inch marks with the edges of your fabric and the lines on your mat, and trim. Here are 4 perfect triangles already sewn together. With this method, you avoid sewing on biased edges and you get a chance to trim your triangles to perfection. This stem is paper pieced. You'll just need 3-inch scraps for this. This thin line with these pointed edges separates these 2 triangles. Instead of making a template or figuring out seam allowances for these small pieces, I often revert to paper piecing. Now you can find this pattern at learnhowtoquilt.com. Just follow the link below. But I think it's best that you learn how to make your own paper piece patterns. I like to use 1/4-inch graph paper when I draw my patterns. You know the measurement of this square is 1.5 inches. So draw a 1.5-inch square. Move down 1/4 inch and over 1/4 inch and draw this diagonal. Repeat on the other side. Move over 1/4 inch and then down 1/4 inch and draw that diagonal. Add the 1/4-inch seam allowances all the way around, and then continue those diagonal lines through the seam allowances to the edges. I've cut out my square. It doesn't have to be perfect. I just have to make sure that I don't cut off the dashed line. And then I will fold my pattern on those diagonals. I'll turn this over, take the strip for the stem, and cover that diagonal and pin. Make sure that this fabric is longer than these dashed lines. Fold your paper, take your scissors and eyeball about 1/4 inch and trim. Square, that's about 3 inches and half. Doesn't have to be perfect. That's what I like about paper piecing. And this is where that triangle will go. I'll take and put right sides together, flip it over to this side. I want to check to make sure that there's fabric up here and there's extra fabric down there. I'll take this to the sewing machine and stitch. I started stitching before that dashed line and I ended after that dashed line. Turn it over, take it to my iron and press. Repeat those steps on this side. Fold back the paper, cut about 1/4 inch seam. Pick up your triangle, put right sides together, take this to the sewing machine and stitch. Here's my completed piece. Turn it over, trim at the dashed lines, and there's my stem. Lay out your block. At this time, I usually tear out the paper, but some people prefer to keep it in till they've finished sewing the whole block together. To tear out the paper, fold it a little bit more. It makes it easier. I like to put my hands on the thread and gently start that tear. And then do it on the other side. And then this middle section usually will just sort of pop out. Put right sides together. Make sure you line up all the edges. Put right sides together and take it to your sewing machine and stitch each section. After sewing, press and then make sure that each one of these sections measures 5 inches. Put right sides together, make sure everything's lined up at the top and on the sides, and stitch a 1/4 inch seam. When sewing these sections together, there's really no intersections that you have to worry about matching. However, you do need to make sure that you don't cut off this point. You'll need 3 maple leaves if you're interested in making this tree featured in the Seasonal Sampler series. Each of your blocks should measure 5 inches square. When sewing these blocks together, you'll want to be careful to match these intersections and to make sure you don't cut off these points. Put right sides together. Line up this edge and don't forget to line up the side edges also. I have it pressed for ease of construction. There's going to be a lot of bulk on this side and on this side. Carefully match those seams. Pin when everything's in place. Press and then add the other leaf. Cut 2 strips 1 3/4 inches wide by the length of your piece, which should be about 14 inches. Put right sides together and pin, and use a 1/4 inch seam to sew both strips to your block. Press the seams to the outside edges, and your piece is ready to go. Hope you decide to add these techniques to your quilting toolbox. In the next video, you'll learn some other methods for making these triangles, along with some other paper piecing ideas. Hope you stay tuned. Thanks for visiting LearnHowToQuilt.com. Please share our videos with your friends.